Greetings all, welcome to our 12th exercise list here for the ZG Plus English exercise course for the TPS. Here today we have another list again of 5 questions mixed in some old TPS questions and some original questions which I have made up in line with the original exam. Hopefully this list was useful to you guys. And we will begin with a long question from the 2016 TPS about Orientalism and Edward Said, which is a well-known author for many of you historians out there. He's very well known. And also, again, this is one of those type of questions that also tests your background culture, as I always say in my course. So let's begin here. On a visit to Beirut during the terrible civil war of 1975 through 1976, a French journalist who wrote regretfully of the gutted down downtown area that it had once seemed to belong to the Orient of Chateaubriand and Nerval. He was right about the place, of course, especially so far as European was concerned. The Orient was almost a European invention and had been since antiquity a place of romance, exotic beings, haunting memories and landscapes, remarkable experiences. Now it was disappearing. In a sense, it had happened. Its time was over. Americans will not feel quite the same about the Orient, which for them is much more likely to be associated very differently with the Far East, China and Japan mainly. Unlike the Americans, the French and the British, less so the Germans, Russians, Spanish, Portuguese, Italians, and Swiss, have had a long tradition of what I shall be calling Orientalism, a way of coming to terms with the Orient that is based on the Orient's special place in European Western experience. The Orient is not only adjacent to Europe, it's also a place of Europe's greatest and richest and oldest colonies, the source of its civilizations and languages, and its cultural contestant, and one of its deepest and most recurring images of the other. In addition, the Orient has helped to define Europe or the West as its contrasting image, idea, personality, and experience. Scroll down. Having a few technical issues again. Here we go. Okay. In addition, the Orient has helped to define Europe or the West in contrasting image, idea, personality, and experience. The Orient is an integral part of European material civilization and culture. Orientalism expresses and represents that part culturally and even ideologically as a mode of discourse with supporting institutions, vocabulary, scholarship, imagery, doctrines, even colonial bureaucracies and colonial styles. In contrast, the American understanding of the Orient will seem considerably less dense. To speak of Orientalism, therefore, is to speak mainly, although not exclusively, of a British and French cultural enterprise, a project whose dimension take in such disparate realms as the imagination itself, the whole of India and the Levant, the spice trade, colonial armies, and a long tradition of colonial administrators, a formidable scholarly corpus, innumerable Oriental experts and hands, and Oriental professorate, many Eastern sects, philosophies, and wisdom domesticated for local European use. The list can be extended more or less indefinitely. From the beginning of the 19th century until the end of World War II, France and Britain dominated the Orient and Orientalism. Since World War II, America has dominated the Orient and approaches it as France and Britain once did. out of that closeness whose dynamic is enormously productive, and even if always demonstrates the comparatively greater strength of the Occident, British, French, or American, comes a large body of text I shall call Orientalists. All right. All right, so it's a very dense text, very long text, but the vocab is pretty straightforward, and it's a topic that usually most people who study for the SCD have heard about it, because it's usually something you read in history. All right, so a lot of people are at least familiar with the idea of Orientalism. Okay, so it shouldn't be too difficult to understand. Now going down to question 1. According to the text, decide whether the following statements are right or wrong. All right. Let's begin with question number 1. Oops, sorry. The author asserts that the Orient, as Europeans tend to see it, is a culturally ancient creation. And that one is correct. It's pretty straightforward. It says since antiquity, it says here. The Orient was almost an European invention, has been since antiquity a place of romance. All right, so it's a European invention and is a culturally ancient creation since antiquity. All right, so that one is correct. Moving on to question number 2. The Portuguese, as well as other European peoples, share the exact same Orientalist tradition as the British. And this one, you can tell is incorrect by this language here, shares the exact same Orientalist traditions. It has to explicitly be said in the text that, or else it's wrong. And here it doesn't say, it says the French and British have one view, and less so the Germans, the Russians, Spanish, and the Portuguese. So they have a different idea. Well, generally the same, but with different emphasis on the idea. So it's not exactly the same, okay? This one is pretty straightforward. These are actually easy reading interpretation questions here that we have. All right, so number 1, correct. Number 2, incorrect, wrong. All right, question number 3. Even though the Orient neighbors Europe, the peoples of this region are most likely to appear as Europe's other, and that is correct. As you can see, Europe or the West uses the region, the Near East, as a way to define the other. All right, so it's the Orient, it's cultural contestant and one of the deepest and most reoccurring images of the other. So that's where the West draws his image of the other. It's not from the Far East, but actually from the Near East. What today is the Middle Eastern region. Okay, so this one is correct. Moving on to question number 1, item number 3. To item number 4, I mean. It can be said that the French journalist quoted in the text was disappointed not to find the landscape once described by the referred writers. Okay, let's check. The Orient is an integral part culturally. On a visit to Beirut, a French journalist wrote regretfully of the gutted downtown area. So the area that he thought was the Orient that was described by Chateaubriand and Neville was not the Orient that he saw there anymore after the Civil War. It was a gutted downtown area, not an exotic place of romance, as once said, as once they thought it was. It was once French writers and Western writers touted it to be. Okay, so it can be said that the French journalist quoted in the text was disappointed, yes, not to find the landscape once described by the referred writers. That is correct. Okay, it was a different place. It wasn't the place he was expecting. All right, moving on to question number 2. Again, reading interpretation questions, very semantic question. The word Orientalist, which was the last word, though it can be correctly replaced by Orientalists. No. Orientalist would be the bodies, a large body of text, I call Orientalist text. So it's a body of text, almost like a library of text, called Orientalist. And Orientalists are the actual experts in Orientalism, or the actual supposed to be experts of the Orient, the ones that Said is criticizing. So it's different. One is a corpus of work, a library, and the other is actual experts, or tout themselves to be experts. Okay, so number 2 is incorrect, right? It's not that complicated, this exercise. It seems complicated at first glance, but once you get down to it, it's not that complicated at all. All right, moving on to question number 2, item number 2. The text defined by Edward W. Said as Orientalists, albeit numerous, always suggests the Occident's superiority. In this case, the only case is correct because when he says Orientalist, it necessarily means that the texts consider the West superior to the Orient. All right, that's the definition of his view of his historical theory. All right, so in this case, the always is correct because all of the texts in the Orientalist library consider the West to be superior. All right. Okay. So in this particular case, the word always is correct here. All right, it refers to his theory. Item number 3. The adjective remarkable in bold could be replaced by significant or uncanny in the context of the text. Uncanny is a synonym of remarkable, which is also a synonym of significant. And in this case, it can be correctly, in this sentence, it can correctly be exchanged, these words, without affecting the meaning of the text here. So in this case, it's pretty clear cut. It's correct. All right. No polemic about that. The expression coming to terms with in bold could be replaced by assimilating without altering the meaning of the sentence. I think originally it was supposed to be correct, but they annulled it because, of course, assimilating is not necessarily coming to terms with. Coming to terms with is accepting. Like sometimes you reluctantly accept something. When you assimilate, of course you accept things, but sometimes it can be done by force, sometimes it's by your own will. So it's not the same as coming to terms with, because coming to terms with is you agree to accept it. All right, so it's not necessarily the same meaning. So in that case, that's why it was annulled. All right, it could be a synonym, it depends on the context. So they decided to annul the question. All right, so it's invalid. So recapping here, question number 2, we have 1 incorrect, 2 correct, 3 correct, and 4 annulled. Okay. Moving on to question 3. Moving on to question 3. In reference to the context, now the content, not the context, the content of the text, its vocabulary and semantic structure, basically everything, decide whether the following statements are right or wrong. The notion of Orientalism, which the author intends to investigate, is built upon a volume of written text throughout the centuries. And that is correct. That is the Orientalist texts, the library, he said, the numerous texts. So this is basically repeating this question here in another word, in another phrasing. Okay, of course, removing this last part. But here, of course, there's a corpus of literature which he deems Orientalist. All right. Okay, so this one is also correct. Moving on here to 2. The Orient has taken part in molding the contemporary European experience. Of course, yes, the Orient serves as the other of Europe. So by defining the Orient, they define the Europeans themselves, okay? So in contrast with the Orient. So of course it was a definite part of molding the contemporary European experiences. And plus, languages, religion, everything came from there, from the Orient, and it was repurposed to Western Europe later on, okay? So this one is correct as well. Question 3. The British and the French tradition of Orientalism is forged through the colonial experience and academic corpora. Of course, again, the Orientalist texts and the colonial experiences of both countries, especially in the Levant and the Near East there, North Africa as well. So, of course, this is what they say. The core of Orientalism is there in the British and French experience, and less so in the German, Portuguese, Russian, and other countries' colonial experiences. So it focuses more on the British and French tradition. Okay, this one is correct. Presently, America situates itself in a different position towards the Orient regarding British and French perspectives. And this is incorrect because America feeds into the British tradition of the Orient itself. Of course, it's less dense, but it feeds into the same views that the British and the French had, okay? Although in a different intensity, okay? But it feeds in. It's not in a different position. Maybe less intense, but not in a different position, okay? So that was our first text, 3 questions. Easier than if what might seem at first hand. All right. Most of the candidates are familiar with Said, so they would have this at least a notion of what Orientalism is, which helps a lot. Okay. Moving on to the second text here, which is a much shorter text. Okay. There's a long tradition of modeling scientific history, of studying the past in order to shape the future. In the 19th century, the English historian Henry Thomas Buckle used a broad brush approach to the past in an effort to identify natural laws that govern society, delivering his findings in a series of very popular public lectures, as well as a highly ambitious, if unfinished, history of civilization in England. Buckle's contemporary, the French positivist Auguste Comte, had earlier proposed his law of 3 stages, which styled human society in passing through a theological and metaphysical stages before arriving at a scientific self-understanding through which to build a better society. Comte was translated by English sociologist Harriet Martineau, who wished to make the public aware of the great general invariable laws operating in society. Comte's work provoked a numerous of responses, including a more elaborate social Darwinism of Herbert Spencer, who coined the phrase survival of the fittest. Spencer was significantly less optimistic than Comte about the future of entire humanity or human sciences, believing humanity was fundamentally selfish. Okay, so this is pretty straightforward text about if the laws of history, if history has laws, if humanities have laws like the more exact sciences. So, excuse me. Sorry. Went down the wrong pipe, I guess. All right, now starting with question number 4 here. Considering the content again of text 2, decide whether the following statements are right or wrong. The expression modeling scientific history in bold can be correctly replaced by showcasing scientific history without altering the meaning of the original text. And this is incorrect. Here I try to trick you with using the word modeling. So you think of a model, so you think of showcasing, showing, but it's not showing. It's creating a model, meaning creating a way to analyze scientific history. All right, a scientific method, basically, of analyzing scientific history and not showcasing it. All right, so this one is incorrect. 2, Thomas Buckle lived around the same time as Auguste Comte. So he lived around the same time, that's correct. His contemporary, Buckle's contemporary, the French positivist Auguste Comte. Pretty clear cut. That is correct. They lived around the same time. It doesn't say exact same time, it says around the same time. So it's correct. Herbert Spencer's social theory was based on Auguste Comte's positivism. Correct. Hence, they share a similar outlook for humanity's future, and that is incorrect. The first part is correct. The second part is incorrect. That's why you'll have to always read until the end. Pay attention until the end of the item, because it might change completely in the second part, and you might get it wrong if you just read the first part. If you just read the first part, oh, it's correct, correct. If you don't read the second part, you're going to get it wrong. This is incorrect. They don't have the same outlook. Spencer is far less optimistic than Comte about the future of humanity. All right. Okay, so it's different. All right. So number 4, Thomas Buckle's theory would be considered more ambitious if left unfinished. And this is incorrect. This is again to trick some of the candidates who read very fast and they look, oh, it seems plausible, because here you would look that as well as highly ambitious if unfinished, the history of civilization in England. If you read fast, oh yeah, it will be highly ambitious if unfinished. But here, the problem is that the if here doesn't mean that if it's unfinished, it will be ambitious. It means that it's highly ambitious, but also unfinished, okay? So it's a different meaning of if here. It's used in the sense that it's highly ambitious, even though it's unfinished, okay? Even though would be better here, okay? All right, so that will be incorrect. So recapping, number 1 is incorrect, number 2 correct, number 3 incorrect, number 4 incorrect. All right, and to end our little recap here, our exercise class, number 5 is a strictly vocab question. All right, the expression broad brush and bold cannot be correctly replaced by the words below. And this is a twist. If you read this quickly, because you're always used to the word can be correctly replaced, so you go automatically into that sense. I already made a lot of mistakes when I was a candidate as well, because I didn't read the actual question, because I go in automatic. When I see a question like this, I just go automatic, replace this with that. And this one is the opposite. This is you cannot replace the word, all right? All right. So all-embracing means broad brush. Broad brush meaning contemplating a vast array of theories, of themes, of subjects here. So he's broadening his brush. So something very broad. So here when it says that Buckle used a broad brush approach to the past. So he's looking at every aspect, very broad aspects of the past, various events, various themes, everything. So it's very broad. So it's all embracing. So this could be correctly replaced. So that means this is wrong, because it can be replaced. All right. So a lot of candidates, I think, are going to get this wrong because they don't read the word cannot here. So this is the inverted. I think we're going to have a lot of students who are going to invert the answer key here. Okay. Because all embracing can be. So this is incorrect. Particular is the opposite of all embracing of broad. It's very particular, very individualistic, and this cannot be correctly replaced. All right. So this one is correct. All right. Comprehensive. Comprehensive means the same thing as all embracing, broad brush, very generic. So it's incorrect. It can be replaced. All right. And overreaching. All right. And overreaching, as if we can see here, overreaching cannot be correctly replaced. So it's correct, because overreaching means that you step your bounds, you pass the limits. It's different from broad brush. It's when you overreach, when you pass your limits, when you do something you weren't supposed to do, when you go to you overpass your bounds, and that's not the same as a broad brush. All right, broad brush, you're in the general topic area, but just very generalistic. It doesn't mean you overreached anything. It went beyond your boundaries. All right, so it's incorrect. So that means it's correct here. All right, so this one is incorrect, correct, incorrect, correct. All right. And this is how we end our class 12. Hopefully we'll see you again for our 13th class, our 13th week class. All right, where we again will go into more deep and more exercise questions for this year's TPS. Okay, English TPS. Thank you very much, and hopefully you enjoyed the class. Thank you, and bye-bye.